Ever lie awake at 3 a.m., wondering why everyone keeps leaving? One by one, they're gone, and you're left questioning yourself. It feels like loss, like punishment. But what if it's not? What if God is making space for something better you can't see yet? This is the story of Arthur, a quiet bloke from a small village who lost everything he loved, and what he discovered while trusting. God through loneliness will change the way you see your emptiest days. Stay until the end, because this one's proper worth it. Arthur lives in a small village with narrow lanes, stone walls, fields that roll on forever. The sort of place where everyone knows your name and your business, and nobody locks their front door. Arthur had lived there his whole life. A quiet, gentle bloke with rough hands and a warm smile. His cottage sat at the far end of the village lane, half hidden by overgrown rose bushes his wife had planted years ago, ones he'd never had the heart to cut back. At this time inside, the place was simple. Not posh, not minted by any stretch, but it was full of warmth, full of laughter, full of life. On the wall above the fireplace hung a plain wooden cross. Not fancy, just a reminder, Arthur always said, that God lives in the small things. In the cup of tea you make for a neighbor, in the prayer you whisper when no one's listening. There was a time when Arthur's world was full to bursting. His wife, Margaret, sharp-witted, kind-hearted, always singing something half under her breath while she cooked. His son, Daniel, a lad who'd inherited his father's broad shoulders and his mother's cheeky grin. The three of them were proper close, worked the small farm together, sat round the table every evening, said grace before every meal. Arthur used to thank God quietly, in his own words. Cheers, Lord, not for riches, just for this, just for enough. But here's where it gets hard. Sickness came to the village one bitter winter, and Margaret, strong, stubborn, never ill a day in her life, Margaret, got hit the worst. Arthur didn't sleep for a week. He sat beside her bed, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth, feeding her soup she could barely swallow, begging God with everything he had, please, don't take her from me. I can't do this on my own. But on the 8th morning, Margaret slipped away, peaceful, quiet, like she'd simply decided she was done. The silence that followed was unbearable. Arthur sat in his kitchen staring at her empty chair and felt something crack open inside him. He didn't pray that day. He just wept. And somewhere deep in all that grief, the kind of grief that sits on your chest and won't shift, he screamed at God without making a sound. Why does loving you hurt this much? And then, beneath all the pain, something small and steady answered back. Not words exactly, more like a feeling. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm right here, even in this. The hurt didn't disappear, but it didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Years passed. Arthur's hair went gray. His knees started giving him grief. His hands shook when he poured his morning cuppa. But every single day, before the sun was properly up, he lit a candle, opened his Bible, and talked to God like he was sat right across the kitchen table. Daniel grew up and, like most young lads, wanted more than village life could offer. Can't blame him, really. He left for Manchester, promised he'd visit every few weeks. And at first he did, full of stories about his new flat, his mates, his job in the city. Brilliant crack, by the sound of it. But slowly, the visits thinned out, then stopped altogether. Arthur learned to cook for one, learned to fill the silence with the radio. Some nights, the loneliness settled over him like a fog he couldn't see through, and he'd sit by the window in the dark and whisper, God, is this what faithfulness gets you? Is this all there is? People who've never experienced feeling abandoned and alone don't understand how loud that question gets, how it echoes. But every morning, Arthur got up anyway, not because the ache was gone, but because he reckoned God gives you just enough strength for today. Not tomorrow, not next week, just today. And Arthur used every bit of it. He baked extra bread and left it on doorsteps. He worked his little garden like it was sacred. Ground, praying over the seeds. As he planted them, proper daft as it sounds, he sat with the elderly widow at the end of the lane for hours, listening to her stories like they were the most important thing he'd ever heard. Kids from the village started turning up at his gate. He'd feed them biscuits and tell them stories. How God sees even the sparrow that falls. So he certainly sees them. Some of those kids looked proper gobsmacked, like nobody had ever told them they mattered before. Stray animals found him too. A limping dog, a half-starved cat, a pigeon with a dodgy wing. Arthur took them all in, muttering softly, "Right then. I reckon you were sent, weren't you?" When people asked how he managed to keep giving when he had so little, he'd just smile and say, "God fills what you empty out for him." Then one spring, Daniel came home. He was tired. You could see it on him. The city had wrung him out. He stood in the doorway watching his old dad, bent and slow, pottering about and giving everything he had to people who'd probably never think twice about him. And Daniel felt proper guilty. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "why do you work yourself ragged for people who won't even remember you? You should be resting, saving yourself." Arthur looked at him the way only a father can. Calm, certain, no bitterness in it at all. "God hasn't forgotten me, son. And while I'm still breathing, I'll give what he's given me. That's not being worn out. That's my purpose." Daniel didn't get it. Not then. To him, being lonely meant you'd failed at life somehow. A good life looked like noise and people and being constantly busy. He couldn't see what his father saw. That God was doing something in the quiet. Something slow and deep and brilliant. That evening a man knocked on Arthur's door. Scruffy bloke, clearly down on his luck. Skint, by the look of him. Arthur let him straight in, fed him a hot meal, gave him a blanket for the cold night. When the man left, he gripped Arthur's shoulder and said, "May God repay your kindness when you need it most." Daniel heard the words, but didn't feel them yet. Winter that year was brutal. One morning, Arthur fell in the back garden fetching logs. Couldn't get up, couldn't call out. Just lay there in the frost until a neighbor spotted him through the fence. News spread through the village fast. And this is where it gets me every single time. People came from everywhere. Faces Arthur had helped years back. Some he barely knew. Women arrived with food and medicine. Men brought firewood and stacked it without being asked. Children, the same ones who used to knock at his gate for biscuits, sat beside his bed, holding his hand, saying the prayers he'd taught them word for word. Daniel walked into that cottage expecting to find his father alone and broken. Instead, he found a room full of love. He dropped to his knees at the bedside, tears streaming. "Dad, you were never alone. All this time, you were never alone." Arthur's voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes were steady. "God doesn't take love away, son. He just moves it around, keeps it safe. And when the time is right, he gives it back. Like rain." Daniel stood in that crowd and finally understood. His father's loneliness was never a punishment. It was a preparation. Arthur's quiet seasons weren't wasted. Every bit of love he gave while trusting God through that loneliness, it grew in places he couldn't see. And it came back to him just like he always believed it would. If you're in a lonely season right now, I want you to hear this. It is not the end of your story. It might just be the beginning of your purpose. Have you ever been through a season where God seemed to take everyone away, and later understood why? Drop your story in the comments. I genuinely want to read them. If this moved you, give it a like. It helps more than you know. And if you're new here, stick around. We tell stories like this every single week. Cheers for watching. See you in the next one.